So the research councils don't have one policy on access to data. We have a set of common principles which are based on things like the OECD principles on access to publicly funded research data, which recognise data as a public good which need to be made available for public benefit in a timely manner, given a certain number of constraints for privacy or commercial confidentiality, etc. They provide the underpinning basis from which individual councils then have develop their own policies from. So all the councils have their policies and access to data. They all are basically similar. That we want to make the data our research generates available to people, but they differ in terms of say the time period you're allowed to work the data up, or the constraints that might apply. So some disciplines like biomedicine, there are many more constraints about access to data involving human subjects, whereas in environmental sciences our data tend to be very open, apart from a few special cases, for example, to protect sites of where rare specimens or species might occur, to protect them from damage. Okay. But all the councils have a policy. So, I mean, we've had policies for a while now, so in the sense that, there is a lot of research data openly available out there. They've tended to be more successful, I would say, for those councils which actually have funded an infrastructure to manage and disseminate data. So the Economic and Social Research Council, ESRC, runs now the name has changed, it used to be known as, it's now called the National Data Archive, I'm trying to get the name right. Anyway, they run a data service, what was the National Data Service, for collecting the data from the social sciences that they fund and make it available. My own council funds a series of environmental data centres which manage and disseminate data. So I think the success of policies tends to be linked to the availability of infrastructure to manage and make the research data available. In terms of the next steps, one thing we're thinking very seriously about now is to produce a single unified data policy for the research councils, to have a much more common, a single common policy, but then to be able to clearly articulate the disciplinary differences rather than doing things differently by council, to recognise that there are disciplinary differences which need to be reflected in a policy. Okay, so NERC, Natural Environment Research Council, my own research council, basically we have a number of things that we require. When you apply for research funding, you have to provide what we call an outline data management plan, very small, very cut down, maybe a couple of paragraphs at most, which just identify the key data sets you think are going to be created, which will be of long-term value. If you're funded, then you're required to generate a full data management plan within 6 months in conjunction with one of our 7 environmental data centres. So the key thing we do is actually we put substantial funding into managing a network of environmental data centres whose job it is to manage and make available environmental data to the wider NERC community for the long term. So if you're funded by NERC, you're then required to interact with the most relevant data centre and to ensure the data sets that your research is producing, which are of defined long-term value. We won't manage everything forever. Those long-term data sets get submitted to the data centre in a timely manner with the appropriate metadata, and then we take on the commitment to manage those in the long term. And one of the key things we do is then work with quite a wide community to try and exploit the data that we hold, to advertise the data that we hold, to work with particular communities, especially commercial organisations, for them to be able to get value from the data we have, by various sort of innovation programs to engage commercial industries, explain the data we have, and to look to see the business problems they're trying to solve, and trying to link the data we have, the people who understand data, to the problems that they're trying to address in the commercial sector. I mean, I was talking about this in the talk I gave yesterday. I think the way I feel the way science is undertaken, not the rationale for doing science, not the generic process that we will follow, but moving into a digital age, the way research is being undertaken, the expectations of the wider community, I think, are changing. So in a digital age, where most people can, at least within Europe, will have access to the internet. Most people can, if they want, can publish anything on the internet. There's an expectation that stuff out there is openly available and is available for free. So what we as researchers have to recognise that the expectations within the wider community are changing, and our research has to support those expectations in a much more open fashion. In the same way, we have to ensure our science is open to ensure the transparency of our research and the robustness of the research. The days of "trust me, I'm a scientist," I think are passing, and we now have to justify the results we come up with and be much more prepared to defend those results by making the supporting information, the data, the samples, the specimens available for others who want to try and replicate the research. So it's this whole paradigm of open needs to change the way research is, I wouldn't say practice, but in terms of the way the research materials and the research outputs are made available. And that, I think, as we've talked about, is the big change that's coming. And the research community, to some extent, I think, has still got to adapt to the changes that digital technologies and the internet and a network world are bringing about, in the same way as many other industries and ways of working have had to change. I mean, who remembers Kodak? They were a major company in the era of the analog camera. Now, as far as I can tell, they just make printing inks and materials for reproducing images. So every organisation has had to, and society is having to rise to the challenges of a network world. Scientific research is no different.